Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's DevSecOps Bunch. It's hard to believe it is the end of September. I guess halfway through September already. It's been a wild year. Today, we're talking about continuous testing, a winning strategy for releasing 5-star mobile apps. I'm super excited to have Eran Kinsbruner back. He's a great author, speaker, and knowledgeable guy. He knows everything about quality automation and more. He's probably forgotten more than most of us have ever learned. So he's joining me again this year, and we'll be talking and getting started in about 30 seconds. As we usually do, we wait for folks to join because everybody's always running late from one meeting to the next, especially in this land of living on Zoom and WebEx. But we'll get started shortly. I'll remind everybody a couple of housekeeping things. At the tail end of the webinar, we'll be taking questions. So as we talk today and go back and forth, please use your Q&A chat button to ask questions, and we will in turn have that conversation, answer those questions at the end. Any questions we don't get answers to, we will follow up afterwards. We are recording today's webinar, as we always do. So within a couple of days, you'll get a copy of the webinar recording and a link to the slides. You also get links to other useful information. You'll find today's session is power-packed. Eran and I have both filled in lots of resources that you can go learn more from, because we all believe in extending the learning journey and helping you master the topics you're trying to approach. And so with that, we will go ahead and get started. Once again, I'm Brian Reed. I'm your host and speaker today. Welcome to the September DevSecOps Bunch. Today, we're talking about continuous testing, a winning strategy for 5-star mobile apps that everyone wants. So with that, I'll ask Eran to introduce himself a little bit. So for those of you who haven't had the chance to meet him yet, go ahead, Eran.
Hi, Brian, and thank you for NowSecure for hosting this webinar. It's not my first time speaking with Brian. I've been in the space for over 22 years now. You see the white hair. It's from searching and trying to find many bugs in software. Luckily, there are plenty, which gives me my job security. As Brian mentioned, I'm a chief evangelist for Perfecto and Blazemeter under Perforce, also an author of 4 books as of today. I actually collaborated with Brian in one of my books, and thank you again for partnering with me. Again, looking forward to be here and talk about continuous testing for mobile.
Very good. So thank you for joining us again. I am Brian Reed. I'm the Chief Mobility Officer at NowSecure. You may wonder what a Chief Mobility Officer does if you haven't met me before. So I've been doing mobile security, mobile applications back to first generation mobile that was BlackBerry. And kind of along that journey, I wound up in a strategy and strategic account role, and that kind of led to Chief Mobility Officer, which allows me to blend the strategy side of what we do with the operational side of what we do. So I spend a lot of time working with organizations like those visiting us today on our live webinar to try to help you understand where you can go and what are best practices and all the rest. I had the privilege today of being online with OWASP. And there's some great things going on around OWASP. I was on a call in an event the other day with Google, and we're going to be talking about some cool advancements around Google Android as well. So Eran and I are going to do quick intros of the companies here a little bit. So NowSecure has been around for more than a decade. We're big in standards and building standards. We're big in best practices. We actually started with an initiative to write the initial documentation for how the U.S. federal government could use iPhone and Android devices all the way back in 2008 and 2009. So today we've grown out a full portfolio. We integrate with all the tools in your tool chain, and we're kind of your one-stop shop for all things mobile app security and mobile app security testing. And so we'll talk a bit about that today. We have lots of customers in all kinds of industries. Obviously, we work a lot with the regulated industries where typically security requirements are very high in those organizations. Along with the federal government, we work in high tech, healthcare, financial services. We do a lot of really cool stuff around IoT. I think I'm telling an IoT story later that we'll get to as well. So we appreciate the opportunity to share that information with you today and bring you along on your journey of building your mobile programs. So with that, I'll hand it over to Eran to tell us a little bit about Perfecto and Blazemeter.
Sure, Brian. So I don't know, for those of you online who are not familiar with Perfecto and Blazemeter, these are 2 SaaS cloud-based solutions for continuous testing for both web and mobile application, focusing on mobile, native, hybrid, any application types can be tested in the Perfecto cloud on real smartphones and tablets, iOS and Android, as well as virtual devices, emulators and simulators. We support all functional test automation frameworks, and we complement mobile user experience testing with BlazeMeter for performance testing as well. We execute at higher scale in the cloud in multiple geographies, and we provide a unified reporting platform so you can actually see all of your reports coming from Appium and Espresso and XUI Test and Selenium and other frameworks, all in a single dashboard. Moving to the next slide, it's just kind of looking at, actually dovetails pretty nicely to what we're going to talk about today, and it's all about continuous testing and shift left. We believe with Perfecto and BlazeMeter that, you know, to do shift left, you need continuous testing, you need high degree of test automation of the right test cases, functional, security, performance, accessibility, everything. And we are trying to bring everyone together, all practitioners at all skills level, to do and create, execute, and analyze all of these testing types.
So I've been very impressed in working with Perfecto in the market with what clients have been doing with their technology, and that's why we've invited them along. First poll today. So we do a couple of polls. These polls are to help make sure that we're talking to the right people. So our first poll is going to happen now. So we know there's people with lots of different backgrounds that are joining this. We have QA, we have DevOps, we have development people, we have security people, and other areas. So if you would please take a second and pick what role you are. Again, this will help Eran and I know where to lean as we make our comments and tell our story. So I can't vote as a host or a panelist, but we'll leave the poll open for another 15 or 20 seconds. Again, we appreciate you doing this. It just helps us drive the story in the right direction. So, all right, why don't we take a look at who's here today? And we got DevOps, QA, security, and some others. We'll thank all the others for joining. And obviously, for the rest of you, we appreciate you joining us today as well. So let's go ahead and close out the poll. So this year's DevSecOps bunch, if you've been with us for the last few years, this year's we've kind of started, and every session has an opening story. So there's some journey that gets us to where we are and where we want to go. And I want to talk about cars. I happen to be a little bit of a car freak. Not as much as my dad and some other people. I did a little work with exotic British cars when I was younger. Today I have a Tesla, and man, is that thing fast and cool and electric. But we think all the way back to the history of cars. They used to be hand-built cars. 5 or 10 men would take months to build a car, literally to build a car. And a pretty smart guy named Ford came up with a pretty cool idea of an assembly line, right? And so if we think about what's actually happened in software, for example, they both followed this pattern. Small, handcrafted, waterfall-driven, takes 18 months to produce a software release. I got a lot of gray hair. Eran was talking about his years of finding bones. I worked on development tools like Visual Studio and Visual Basic with Microsoft many moons ago. And then Java happened. And I worked in the Java development environments and the Java orb, Corbacom, that whole world. So when we think about it, what was really great here is today's DevOps pipeline is a lot like the automated production line that Ford came up with, right? So we've now got groups of people working together. You know, the code is moving down the line like the car is moving down the line, and now you get specialists. The problem is that while we're building the code, there's still handcrafted work that has to happen. We don't have AI yet that's that good that can replace an actual developer to write all the code. So much like we're building everything, right? We want that production line to do as much. There's still the handcrafted parts, right? And so when we think about the handcrafted parts, we want to make sure that our professionals, our developers, have all the support they need to do the handcrafting of really creative things that go through the development cycle. So to speed everything up, automotive manufacturers use robots. We have DevOps, right? So all the automated tooling that we now have in a tool chain, the average successful DevOps shop reports that they have at least 10 tools in place. And most of them are there for automation to make a lot of this work happen automatically in the background, right? Just like the automotive world evolved. But somewhere along the line, we kind of forgot quality testing, performance testing, security testing. We did a little integration testing, right? And so for a lot of teams, just like cars may be hand inspected, a lot of software is hand inspected. And so we can kind of learn from what's been going on in the automotive world as we kind of think about what's going on in our world. Now, the great news is that from an automotive perspective, there's some really great advancements when it comes to robots and automated sensors actually measuring quality in the production line. And now instead you have a human monitoring the tools doing the work instead of the human doing the work. And so now we're seeing world-class automation to the entire production line for most of car assembly and car inspection. And we're finding that in software now too. So Eran and I are going to talk about that today. Is much like robots and sensors and computer systems and AI are improving the quality and speed of car production lines, we've got the same thing happening in software. So Eran, why don't you get us started on some of the mobile trends going on today?
Sure. So a lot of things are happening. As we know, we are just, I'd say, a week since Apple launched their iOS 16 with the new iPhones, and they actually implemented a new safety check in the iOS 16. And it's kind of, if you look at what Google has been doing over the past few months with their new safety or privacy policy, I think that we are starting to see a few trends that are starting to impact, the entire digital landscape, the digital apps. We are looking at privacy and security, safety, becoming top of mind for application providers, Google, Apple, Microsoft. We are looking at single code-based applications, which are also transforming the way we engage with our customers. And at the end of the day, it's mostly the most important thing is our customers, right? And this is why Google and Apple continuously invest in enforcing these kind of things, asking the developers to take responsibility for security, meaning asking the user to only check what he actually wants to use or what is only able to permit access. It asks the developers to be transparent to the users with what kind of permissions and other stuff the application is going to use, because if from some reason the user feels uncomfortable granting such permission, he can actually block it right now. So I think there is kind of a new rebalance between the application developers and the end users, and it's being monitored and governed by Apple and Google for the mobile spot. Going to the next slide. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was just simply going to say absolutely. And at the tail end of this session, we're going to talk about Google Play Data Safety Program in more detail. So back to you on app types are changing too.
Yeah, because if the previous slide wasn't scary enough, we're starting to see kind of a challenge. And if you say, okay, are we challenging native apps? The ones that are challenging native apps are the ones that actually own the native frameworks, right? Because Google, owning Android, came up with Flutter, and Flutter is a single code-based application. Google also, two or 3 years ago, started ramping up the PWA, the progressive application, and then Mozilla and Apple caught up with that, and now Safari and Google Chrome, Edge, Mozilla Firefox, all the browsers now support PWA. And what I mean by that is that everything that I was talking in the previous slide about security, privacy, quality, continuous testing, we're just starting to see a new wave of applications, and they are now going to run on different origins, on mobile and on web and on desktop, either from a single code base or using a single code base that now can be compiled into a different application types. So there is no slowing down in our digital innovation and transformation, which makes continuous testing, our topic for today, even more critical than ever.
Absolutely. And those risk trends are actually trending up over time. There's a coal fire benchmark report we just contributed to that's coming out like today, tomorrow, next week. And that benchmark report is actually really interesting because their data actually shows that the web security side has actually been improving. So there's a net decline on a broad base over the last 3 years in terms of open vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities that are escaping into the wild. And even in their pen testing and their continuous analysis, they're discovering that just the net number of security vulnerabilities being created during the development cycle is going down. But we're seeing the opposite. So when you look at our mobile risk tracker, for example, it's a open benchmark where you can see summarized data of the top 5,000 apps in the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store. If you look carefully, that average scoring trend is actually slightly going up over the last year and a half, not going down. And so this is a real concern because as the complexity of apps grows and the technology underlying it, as the platforms get more locked down, how do we actually deliver that quality experience that meets security and privacy and quality bars in a land where basically designing and testing these apps is actually getting harder? So our second question is, we love testing tools. Eran and I both come from testing companies. So what kind of testing tools do you have today? So we're going to guess you probably have some kinds of tools that either your humans are using or running in an automated fashion in the background. Lots of different tools you might be using. So go ahead and answer the question here if you would. Again, that will help Eran and I sort of understand who's got what, and we could shape that some into our conversation. We know from the first poll that was a little higher on the security side than the QA side. Thank you for joining. We'll help both of you learn more. We'd also like to know about your tools. So we'll give it about 10 seconds. And then if we want to bring up the results. The answer is lots of everything. That's a good thing. Good news. Thank you for doing that.
It's a great mix, Brian.
Yeah, so that's really, it does take a village, right? It does take a village. The average DevOps tool chain has at least 10. The higher performing ones have 20 or 30, and they have multiple testing tools as part of those lines. So that's good to know. We're glad to have you along for the journey. So we want to talk about quality. So let's think about quality. So in the last 2 months, I've been working with a couple of organizations on models for quality and went back to CMM and the capability maturity model, went back to my days where I built a QA infrastructure in the early 90s where we had to scale around what was going on with the databases. So we built the world's largest scalable test engine for databases and data middleware that morphed into kind of like the data warehousing world. And so as part of that, there's really kind of a set of pillars, and you may have a set like these in your organization or not. So, you have to set some standards. What is the quality bar expected in your organization? Your team needs to have the skills to write quality code. You need to manage the requirements, and quality should actually be in your requirements. And then you need testing and remediation, right? So how are you going to find the quality issues, and how are you going to fix those issues and manage the bug backlog that ultimately we all live with? And of course, there's the classic metrics and continuous improvement. And so, in the early days of like when I was doing QA, we had a lot of manual work going on with as much scripting and as much code as we could write wrapped around it, right? So we always had this contention between quality and speed and how fast you could operate. Fast forward to today, and Eran and I are working in the world where there's a ton of automation that you can take advantage of, right? And that automation up that curve gives you speed. So there's an interesting way to think about this. So Eran, let's talk about this from a functional perspective and how quality now maps into tooling.
So when you're thinking, especially, continuous testing for mobile applications, if you divide, quality inside the pipeline into the different pillars, if you like. So we talked earlier that it takes a village. We have shown the poll that takes or shows how many different tools you need. So effective tool selection definitely drives efficiency, productivity, and it needs to match the persona, because we talked about the village, but we're talking about a squad who is responsible for a feature set or a specific functionality that is being built. These team or team members have different skill set. They know Java, they know Swift, they know, I don't know, other languages. We need to make effective tool selection. We need to give them the right training and education so they can be successful, because as we have shown in the previous slide and trends, things aren't standing still. Even though you think that you are an expert in everything, I've been in this field for so many years. Each and every day, I find a new piece of information that I didn't know about, right? Just a few months ago, I started learning more about APKs in the form of Android application binaries, and then app clips with iOS. So everything is changing, and you need to keep your personas up to date. And obviously, you need to make sure that all the requirements are up to date as well, because we are living in a DevOps reality, right? 1 week, 2 week sprints. All the requirements need to match the skills, the tools, and obviously automation then drives the velocity that we are trying to achieve.
When we look at security, there's a very common parallel, right? So you need to have standards and agreement. You need to understand how to train your team to make sure they're writing the right code. What's interesting about us is when we look at the analysis of literally millions of app reviews, there's 5 or 6 most common vulnerabilities, right? And that's a training thing, right? When you see those kinds of patterns. You need to have clear security requirements going into it, right? So it's the product management team generating those requirements, the security team working with them on those requirements and managing those in the backlog. And of course, you have to automate everything. In today's world where the velocity is going faster and faster, humans can't keep up. So you got to leverage some combination of automation and then human ingenuity, right, to maximize that yield in terms of coverage / cost / time. And all of it has metrics, sort of underpinning it. So we bring it all together. It's really interesting that today, quality as much as anything is defined by automation. And in many instances, when you look at why automotive manufacturers put in robots, it's not because they're cheaper. It's because they do the same thing every single time. They eliminate human error. They might run slightly faster, right? But they give you that predictability that generates quality. If I know that I'm testing the same thing the same way every day, every build, all the time, then I have confidence that I'm grooming quality in, and that's what we want to get to. And so now it's a world where the craft is development. The craft is making sure the tools are configured in a way to bring the quality, but then you let the tools do a ton of the work for you. And you get that predictability and consistency and all that great stuff.
And maybe I'll just add to the previous slide, the word under the automation, obviously, and very specific to mobile, scalability, right? We need to test on so many different device permutation, right? As I mentioned earlier, iOS 16 was released last week with a bunch of iPhones. iOS 16 is no longer supported on iPhone 7, 7 Plus, 6S, 6S Plus, iPad Mini 4. I can name like 10 devices which were terminated with iOS 16, which means they are stuck on iOS 15 forever or until they are dying, which means scalability, consistency, everything that is written here with automation, it really helps you drive quality, obviously, much faster. And with that in mind, let's look at what's holding us back for the past few years, right? And this is the ocean of testing, okay? The ocean of testing, I look at it as a rebalancing act, and it requires training, it requires skill set. It also requires looking at data. Brian, you were saying that, the recurring things that happen on the security front, there are also, data around regression bugs on functional aspects, accessibility, performance, and so on and so forth. You need from one sprint to the next to make sure that your teams are able to balance between the scope of testing, meaning what is entering the CI/CD pipeline, what is being automated and moves from one sprint to the next, what test cases are being terminated, and what manual test cases are entering, maybe even the automation pipeline, or at least are part of the cycle. And this cannot be something that is static. It changes based on product requirement, market trends, like new releases of iOS and so on and so forth. So this is, in my mind, the problem, but also the solution to drive continuous testing at scale, which is always up to date. Looking at the data, looking at your product requirements, looking at your test cases, the reliability of the test cases, and doing this balance so you are always kind of covering the right things.
And so we want to get those winning 5-star reviews, right? When users love the features, when they have a high quality experience, when they know you're respecting their privacy, right? When it works every single time. The worst thing in the world is you push an update and then your 5 stars collapse to 2 stars because you missed something in testing, right? All of those things are what we want to get to. And if we begin with the end in mind of, we not only want to produce a great app, but we want to get the 5-star reviews, which drives more users, more consumption, more revenue, whatever it is, we need to figure out how to equip those pipelines. So for those of you who have attended our regular DevSecOps bunch sessions, we start with a picture like this, which is, let's have a look at our pipeline, and then let's talk about how to run the pipeline. Now, since we're talking about mobile today, of course, we're talking about apps often written in like Xcode or Android Studio or one of the intermediate languages. You're using all kinds of tools, CI/CD tools, ticketing tools, build tools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You might be using orchestration, vulnerability management tools, and because it's mobile, odds are pretty good you're producing an app that's going to get pumped into one of the public app stores. You got to think about that in the mix as well. And so we're going to use this as a frame to talk about some of today's conversation. So I'm going to hand it over to Eran to talk about, let's look at how to build a pipeline and handle all of those functional and quality issues.
And luckily, Brian, what I'm showing right now on the screen, this is taken from one of my top customers. It's a very mature one, which implements CI/CD, CT, the 3 C's that we like to talk about. by the way, CI, CD, CT, continuous integration, continuous testing, continuous delivery. These are the things that really makes DevOps tick one time after the other. And in this example, in this pipeline, this specific customer building a mobile native application, iOS and Android, it's doing three typical milestones, or I would say gates. It has 3 gates in a given day, and this is every day, right? What you see here happens every day at high scale. And for this example, this customer does up to 7 PRs, pull requests a day, and for each pull request is allowing 10 minutes of feedback. Think about 10 minutes of feedback. You must use automation here. It can be unit testing with a mix of functional testing. For that purpose, is only using virtual platforms, emulators and simulators from a mobile perspective, but is getting fast feedback, very immediate one. And every developer who is doing a pull request triggers such a PR through Git actions, GitHub actions, or other CI tool. It doesn't matter. Then they all reach into a merge point, which is the noon build. In the noon build, they are trying to collect a 1 hour feedback. And this is done on a mix of real smartphones and tablets and virtual devices, depending on the cut between the different testing types. Think about these 2 milestones within the day. They lead to the nightly regression of about 8 to 10 hours. And this is a full-blown high coverage cycle. But think about it, they reach this point, it can be a midnight or whatever, where they have great confidence because they already executed a bunch of test cases throughout the day on the recent changes, code changes. And this is all about continuous testing, assessing risks, mitigating risks, and driving confidence to the pipeline without flakiness. So they really get in the morning after a very clear picture of what the quality is for the current build. So that's something that if you are not, or if you're just trying to build a pipeline, CI/CD, CT, this is a good example taken from real life that you can mimic. This is, in my mind, when we are looking at the previous pipeline, and when you're looking at how to move, Brian, you were showing, earlier the manual testing and the automation and how they kind of, our manual testing actually holds off the automation testing and the velocity. So what we have seen, especially with Perfecto and Blazemeter, is that yes, you do need the level of exploratory and manual testing to really find, sophisticated ad hoc exploratory testing. But when you drive automation, obviously you get feedback much faster. And if you look at the previous slide that I've shown, you have in some cases only 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, you cannot do that many manual testing scenarios, especially not on a mobile phone that takes time to load and install the app and validate screens, etc. So you can either use, and with Perfecto, what we are giving the customers, we are giving them ability to use no-code solutions, or they can use the Appium Espresso X UI test toolchain to really measure functionality, but also user experience testing when they are driving load on the backend through the Blazemeter load generator. So with that, you really get a bridge from manual to automated functional testing, plus some single user performance, if you like, within the pipeline. Moving to the next slide, we can also look at API testing and monitoring, especially with mobile. Mobile today runs on mobile apps run today on so many different backend APIs and services. Think about a banking application. It drives so many different capabilities behind the scenes, and it takes just one single API either to be compromised from a security standpoint, but also from a functional standpoint to not work properly. That messes with your entire application functionality, performance, security, and everything like that. So complementing the previous testing types of functional testing with API testing and also production monitoring of the APIs is also something that our customers have seen and experienced as a good practice. And if you take these 2 slides and put them in the pipeline that I've shown, the 10-minute feedback loop, the 1 hour noon build, and the nightly regression, I'm just talking and showing you a mix of different testing types that you can practice and use to really uncover code changes, vulnerabilities in a very fast way. Lastly, and this is something that I think you would relate also to that pretty well, Brian. What we have seen, especially with mobile application development, is the either from a production standpoint, access to real production data and environment, which is very risky and sophisticated, and some organizations are simply not allowing it, or in early development stages, you simply don't have the time and you don't have the available environment to run all your testing cases. So taking everything that I've shown in the previous slide and putting it under a mocking service environment with driven test data allows you to really test kind of in production, but in earlier stages. So when you drive back to the integration testing phase or pre-production test, you are already in a good place.
Yeah, a little bit of this reminds me of how Uber operates. Uber, in their world, as they're rolling out new features, they'll roll them out selectively in like one country or one city, and then they'll slowly watch the behavior. And they not only have done a lot of testing before they officially launch it, they actually do gradual rollout country by country, which is pretty wild. And part of this really is you need to figure out how do you either emulate or actually run your testing in a production or partial production or early production environment. So totally with it. And then you got to scale, right?
You got to scale. You got to scale also non-functional testing, because we're just getting close to the Black Friday, the Cyber Monday, and all the shopping season. And everyone is doing shopping today on mobile phones. I do it as well. And it's not just Amazon, it's almost any retailer today has a mobile application which allows you to buy, Best Buy, eBay, all these types of things. And especially when you're reaching the peak times and peak hours, you need to scale the functional testing, but also the non-functional testing, and also measure the end user experience under extreme load. I'm working with customers who are testing against 2 million and even more concurrent users and trying to measure the end user experience on the front end, just to understand if they are ready for this holiday season shopping.
All right, so I'm going to steer into security. So we talked about earlier how quality is a measure, really success quality to get your 5 stars. You need to do the quality as in the functional user experience and performance side. You need to do the security side as well. So I'm going to dip back into our pipeline here. And as we think about screaming fast pipelines, right, there's really a set of components, just like Eran walked you through a set of fundamental components for delivering quality at scale with performance and user experience. We need to think about security side. And there's like 5 best practices that I'm sure some of you have heard me say before if you've been in this, right? You need to establish policy using standards. Leverage OWASP. I was just on the phone with OWASP earlier in our OWASP team and the OWASP leadership. There's a real growth in security organizations turning to OWASP to recognize that those standards are vetted, proven, they work, they're defensible, everyone else uses it. So bring that standard in and establish a policy and a relationship between development and engineering, and then the security side that says these are the policies we're going to use, and they're derivative of an industry standard like OWASP. Make sure you've got training, right? You need to make sure that your team knows how to write secure code. As I said earlier, there are 5 common security vulnerabilities over and over and over again. Teach them those 5. It takes half an hour, right? That will dramatically reduce your vulnerability escape rate. Make sure you have that continuous testing as the pipeline operates, right? So continuous testing means scan the code repo, scan the build. So every time you run a build, run a scan, break the build if it doesn't meet certain criteria, and then automatically feed tickets back to that developer. The worst thing in the world is manual testing in the pipeline. What you want to be able to do is have continuous testing in the pipeline. And those tickets that go back to the developers need to be accurate, and they need to be effective. And effective means they need to have developer remediation embedded in it. What is the issue? Where is the evidence of the issue? How do you fix the issue? What are code examples for that? What are the links back to iOS and Android documentation for the developer to better understand the use of a particular API, right? So it's find it fast, it's fix it fast as well. And then finally, not all our apps are created equal. How do I automatically test an app with MFA and anti-tampering in it? How do I effectively test a very complicated scenario in the application that has advanced security controls in it? That means that while I might do 80 or 90% of my testing automatically, I still have to have scheduled into my process ways to do periodic guided or pen tests for those certain things that you just can't automate or that are very serious security risks that you want to make sure you get a human on. But if you can have the system do 90% of the work, right, then you're in a great place. So finally, you got to monitor in production. Eran made a great example of the shopping that's coming, right? So we've got this giant shopping wave. There's massive spikes in scale. I'm still amazed Amazon doesn't go down on Cyber Monday, but they know how to do that with AWS. But when we look at production systems, right, we have had customers who've had issues where a standard service or third-party library suddenly becomes vulnerable to a breach because of a system update by somebody else, a code dependency in a library you're using, a code dependency in a third-party service. So you got to monitor that security in production, right? You got to make sure that that app that you put in the App Store still works. And so what we have found time and again with our customers, it's basically a third, a third, and a third. 30% faster, 30% lower risk, and often 30% lower costs because you're taking cost out because you're using automation. So a solution set that makes this work, Eran talked about the full portfolio that BlazeMeter and Perfecto, bring to the table. We've got a full suite of capabilities to help you get there, but today we're really talking about DevSecOps. So we're going to talk a little bit about platform and want to give you kind of a flavor of what this can be like when you're setting this up. So the biggest barrier we've found in organizations is secure coding skills. The biggest challenge we've found in organizations is there isn't a lot of great training. No one goes to development school, gets a college degree in software development, and learns anything about security. And as a general rule, as I said before, there's really common security errors. So we decided to create a free academy. So any of you on this or your development teams could sign up, get free code training, right? Go take the 5 worst things that happen most frequently and learn how to use those APIs, right? Go learn Mobile AppSec 101. We've actually cloned NowSecure Academy in a lot of different places to enable people to get this training kind of wherever they go. And we're not here to make money on the training. We're here to help you and your development team make sure you really understand AppSec and what that really means in a mobile world. So we encourage everyone to take advantage of it. So now I'm trained. Now I want to deploy automated controls, and I want to align dev, PM with requirements, architects, QA, and security on what is the security criteria for this application? What are the policies we're going to use? And by the way, I might use OWASP as a standard or something else. Maybe I have HIPAA requirements, or I'm in California and I have CCPA requirements. So what we want to do is not have handcrafted testing. We want to have the system to test to that level. So using a policy engine, for example, allows you to configure and have that policy enforced. So now the tickets to get written, the developer requirements that come through the system, the training developers get, and the testing that happens continuously all leverages one standard policy, which gives you predictability, provability, and all the rest. Now, when you're doing the security testing, as I said earlier, it's about being effective in testing the things that actually matter. Eran made a great example. You may only have 10 or 15 minutes, right? So how are you going to get enough testing in 10 or 15 minutes? Well, with NowSecure, you can do 600 tests in less than 15 minutes using static and dynamic and interactive testing on an app running on a real device, just like Perfecto tests on real devices. And that very quickly gives you the battery of the most common things, the 80-20 rule, right? And within that 80-20 rule, then you want to enable someone to do the work very quickly to fix those issues. And so while you're generating these tickets back into engineering, make sure you have those code examples, make sure you have those links to developer documentation, because that's a moment to teach them, hey, you didn't do ATS the right way. You disabled ATS and you shouldn't have. Or, hey, you're not doing a two-way TLS certificate pinning exercise correctly. Here's a way to fix your cert pinning, right? And some of these things are like almost fat finger, simple types of scenarios. And in many instances, the developer was never taught how to use the API in the first place. Now, most developers aren't actually going to live in our tool. Most developers are going to live in their tools, right? So while I'm showing you some of our screens, the reality of a fast-moving pipeline is continuous testing of every build every day throughout the entire life cycle. So now you're in a world where, like, if you're using Jenkins, for example, as your CI/CD, Jenkins is automatically building the app on a regular basis, maybe nightly. Then the tests are automatically running right behind that. And then they're automatically generating tickets like in Jira. One of our most common pairs for our customers is Jenkins and Jira, but you might be using Azure DevOps and Azure Boards. You might be using GitHub or GitLab, right? They're all the same, right? In terms of they're the tools development and the DevOps team uses to drive the pipeline. And so you need to graft into that. So in this world now, NowSecure runs like a testing service for continuous testing in the background. Now, Eran brought some of this up too. You got these weird, complicated scenarios, and how do you deal with that? And so we've got an innovation that we rolled out to our customers recently that you're going to hear an announcement about next week. And that's about something called guided testing. What guided testing is automated continuous testing where a human can pop in and do a little something, but all the rest of it's continuous testing. So now I'm able to take my 80% testing and take it all the way up to 98% testing. And without a full pen test, I can get some pen test-like functionality and coverage. So an analyst can intervene and do MFA or CAPTCHA or specific workflows. We had one of our customers who wanted deeper dive analysis of security around a new shopping cart feature they had, right? So we were able to do a little guided testing in there. Instead of dropping 15 to 25 grand to do a massive pen test, they just used the regular continuous testing, and we popped in, did a little nav, boom. We found one thing for them to fix, and they're off and running, and now they're very confident without all that extra spend and activity. So our guided testing is kind of a really cool thing we think that will evolve, and that's that unique blend or that hybrid blend of continuous testing and a little bit of manual when you need a little bit of manual for something really complicated. The last thing I wanted to hit on, as Eran brought up, we have the Apple privacy and the Google data safety programs now that are really ramping up, and we want to make sure that everybody's informed about what's there. So Google Play data safety is a mandatory requirement that all Android developers, when they submit any build going forward of any Android application, you have to go in and self-attest that this is what you do with your data. What data do you store? What data do you transmit? Where do you transmit it? Have you tested, and can you attest that the third-party libraries you use are safe? Where is your data transmitting? What endpoints is it going to? And so on and so forth. Is the data deletable? Is the user deletable? Your CCPA, GDPR type things. So we're finding most organizations are following the rules. When they have a new Android update, they have to fill out their data safety form. Now, something really interesting is happening, and that is something called an independent security review. So Google has realized, and feedback from people through the Android community has been that, you know what, we'd really like it if you could just certify whether the apps are safe or not. Can you certify that they're following proper privacy guidelines? Can you certify that they're following industry standards for security? And so the ADA organization, the App Defense Alliance, sponsored by Google, has created a specification. So the ADA MASA, Mobile Application Security Assessment criteria, is actually built on the industry standard OWASP. Remember, I talked earlier about working with OWASP and choosing OWASP as your security standard for your organization. So effectively, the ADA group, ourselves, Google, and others, we created a spec that is built on OWASP that allows for independent third-party verification. And so organizations like NowSecure, there's 4 independent security review companies authorized by the ADA program, can go do an independent security review. It's basically a pen test using OWASP MASBS, for lack of a better way to put it. And so now to your Google Data Safety label, you can add an independent security review. This is like an underwriter's laboratory label on your electronics, or a good housekeeping seal of approval for those of you who've been around for a while. And so the whole idea now is we're going to raise the bar for everybody by saying, I now have provable security that some third party has attested to, right? There's many other places in the world where people can get independent reviews, like PCI, for example, and now you can get an independent review for your mobile apps. And we're super excited about being part of that program. We encourage you to make sure you do the safety label the right way, but we also encourage you to think about getting an independent security review. So we're going to kind of bring this all together on our journey. I'll remind folks we'll be doing Q&A in about 3 or 4 minutes. So go ahead and get your questions in there. So Eran, let's think about bringing this all together. Perfecto, Blaze Meter, 5-star quality. How do you see this coming together?
So just to summarize, I think if you want to take a few things from this webinar, so to do continuous testing, you need to exercise all testing types, right? Functional accessibility, performance, security, end user experience. As much as you can automate and put in the cycles, as I've shown in the pipeline example, obviously you'll be in a better place, because fast feedback is the driver for velocity and DevOps. But fast feedback also relies on reporting and insights. So yes, you can do a lot of the velocity and scaling of mobile application testing with security, performance, functionality, and everything like that. With Perfecto and Blaze Meter, with code or codeless testing, it's fully supported. But at the end of the day, to your point earlier, Brian, you are running in a pipeline, you're running kind of in a black hole, if you like. You don't see what's happening in the pipeline up until you get the results, okay? And the results can come from Jira, can come from Jenkins, can come from any dashboard that you are using, but you need to have actionable insights so you can take action fast and remediate fast. So MTTR, mean time to resolution, drives your innovation and application, velocity to your end users. And with almost a bi-weekly release of new iOS versions and patches from Google on Android and new browsers that are also coming to the mobile devices, you need velocity, you need visibility into what's happening in your pipeline. And I believe that, and I've seen many of the joint customers of Perfecto and BlazeMeter kind of complement this continuous testing with functional testing at high scale, performance and end user experience at scale with mocking and test data, all done in a cloud environment with different skill sets that they have. But at the end of the day, they also look at the data at the dashboards and try to make sense out of the data and become better. And that's the continuous improvement.
Absolutely. And so continuous testing has been a mantra for Eran and I in our organizations for a few years now, because it really is a way to raise the bar here, right? And as we think about the story I just kind of walked through, what I've learned in this job that I didn't really realize at BlackBerry is that there is no silver bullet for doing this perfectly. You can't buy one thing or deploy one process or use one technology. It's a holistic approach that combines automated testing in the pipeline with the odd guided test or pen test when you need it. It's education to really get your stakeholders performing at a higher level and writing secure code. And it's leveraging external expertise to raise the bar within your own organization, right? So you combine the right combination of people, process, and technologies here for mobile, just like every other thing, and that's how you get your 5-star reviews. Now, we like to always do a little bit of a case study. So Eran and I are both gonna hit on a case study. And I think I'm going to talk a little bit about a classic financial institution. Now, this Fortune 100 financial services company, like many banks, would rather not have their name in public because they don't want to give away their secret sauce. But how many of you have talked to a developer? I notice most people aren't developers. So how many of you have talked to a development team who said, yeah, I want a 10-minute scan and I want it highly accurate with no false positives and I want to be completely automated and I don't want to have to configure anything and miracle will happen. Our CEO calls it the 0-calorie donut. I want all the flavor with none of the calories, right? Well, in this particular world, they were super excited about the fact that they could move into a DevSecOps pipeline where NowSecure was able to do that continuous scanning throughout the build cycle. That's given them the speed and the velocity they wanted and turned the security team from the Department of No and all the friction into an enabler. There's still a little friction with security because they still hate it when they get security vulnerabilities, but they've set the policy engine that says, here's a set of spec requirements we need to meet. I'm going to only feed you tickets for these particular set of issues that we mutually agreed in policy, and you're going to fix them, right? And then the rest go into backlog or get reviewed later. And that's worked really well for them to get that velocity and raise the bar. And if you're Fortune 100, you need to manage your shareholder risk, right, and your revenue risk. So Eran, tell us about one of your customers.
So yeah, and I'll focus on the airline, even though we are serving financial and insurance companies as well as telcos and others. Everyone is on mobile today. And with this APAC huge airline, who is running, by the way, it's not on the slide, they're running over 2 million executions a quarter, which is amazing scale. And they're running it at the high pass rate of 93%. They have a very healthy pipeline and they have a very high priority business critical applications. I don't know, the world is now opening, everyone is flying. You're flying, you are relying on your mobile app, and this airline definitely relies on mobile app quality and security. They have selected Espresso and XUI test as their frameworks of choice, and they are running these high-scale testing on high-scale mobile devices, iOS and Android, because it's beautiful in the airline industry because you don't know which customers are and from where they're going to come. So they might be using a different Android device or a weird other smartphone that you don't even know. So they're trying to cover as much as possible from the different permutations, and there are many, I know about them. So they're quite successful in running at scale, being top rated. This webinar is about having 5 stars rating. I won't say the name of this airline, but they are one of the top 5 stars airline ratings in the world, not just in APAC. and they are very successful because of this continuous testing mantra and implementing the DevOps automation pipeline. I will continue, and it's all about education, right? Brian, you talked about the Academy for Security. I myself contribute a lot of content, not just books. I am the author of the test coverage guide that you can see here. I'm already working on the fall edition of the index report or the test coverage guide. So these are free tools for you guys, practitioners, to learn more about what's happening around you, which devices, which operating systems are hot and used in most different geographies. What is the state of test automation and how you can increase your test automation velocity and success rate, and also a guide for advanced mobile test automation challenges. How can you do the MFA testing with Appium Espresso and XCI test? How can you do biometrics testing, location, image injection, and barcode testing? There are so many sophisticated use cases in mobile application testing. So you can find a lot of value in these three assets that are given free in this webinar. So feel free to check them out, download them, and if you like them, give me feedback. If you don't, also give me feedback, and we can improve.
Always continuous improvement, even in the learning and the content we create. So a couple things here. There's some really cool stuff going on with GitHub and NowSecure. I encourage you to check it out. We're now native mobile security scanning for any application, mobile application, any library embedded completely into GitHub workflow. So your devs and your security team only ever work in GitHub, which is pretty cool. We also have a tool chain guide, right? We talked earlier about most organizations have 10 or more tools. Well, here's 10 tools or 10 categories of tools you want to think about to make sure you're building security in your pipeline. I'll remind folks we're going to go to Q&A in a second here, so please do ask your questions using the Q&A tab. Want to tell you about NowSecure Connect. And so I think Eran will be joining us as well. NowSecure Connect is our annual virtual one-day conference. It's all things mobile for one day. We're going to have 12 to 14 hours worth of content in multiple tracks. We seriously encourage you to participate. We had 500-600 people last year. We're already tracking towards 1,000 this year. Please do come. All the content is recorded, so whether you come live or you follow up afterwards, get registered so you can get into the replays later. We encourage you to join us. It's great that it's virtual because that means anybody anywhere can participate. There are tracks for devs. There's tracks for DevOps. There's tracks for security. It's basically all things mobile for a day. So we look forward to seeing you there. And with that, if you follow today's best practices, like the airline that Eran talked about, and like the bank that I talked about, you will get those winning 5-star reviews. So we appreciate you participating today. And I'm going to steer into the Q&A session. So as I have a look at the Q&A, remember, you can use that to ask Eran and I questions. I'm going to go with the first question here, which is, how should we balance manual exploratory and automated testing within a given sprint? And I'll steer that to you, Eran.
That's a great question. And if you go back to the slide about the ocean of testing, everything changes every sprint, right? Because you either have new requirements that are coming from the product, you have market events that are happening, a new release of an iOS or an Android. So when you look at the ocean of testing and trying to rebalance, it all starts with data. I mentioned earlier, looking at the test data, looking at the reports that came from the previous regression cycles. If you just take even the pipeline example that I gave you, you have 3 milestones in a given day. So you have the data and you are collecting test results from the 10-minute sprint, from the 1-hour build noon that you are doing, and from the 90 regression. So all this data should guide you, A, which are your high priority test scenarios, the ones that are finding you the most amount of bugs. B, which are the test cases which are useless or flaky, unstable, that are just causing you delays and you want to exclude them, okay? And which manual test cases, exploratory test cases that were added as new ones because you didn't have time in the sprints to automate. It happens a lot, but you want to automate them. So I've just mentioned 3 considerations that allows you to do this rebalancing every week, okay? You retire test cases, you bring new test cases to the sprint, and you take guided and data-driven decisions. That's, in my mind, the best way to keep up. And yeah, it's tiring, it's a lot of work, but that's the only way to keep up. That's why we call it continuous testing. It's not a one and done. It's something that you do over and over again.
I would absolutely agree. I think one interesting thing I've seen in my journey here is that from a security testing perspective, we've been adding maybe 50 to 100 tests a year as the operating systems evolve, APIs and languages evolve, and so on and so forth. But the one thing that's constant is network connections either work or they don't. Data storage works or it doesn't. Crypto works or it doesn't, right? Through all of that. And so much in the same way as I talked with guided testing earlier, you can now automate 60, 70, 80% of your security testing, right? It's not dependent on many of the challenges that you'll have with functional testing, because it's just basically, am I doing cert pinning the right way? Am I encrypting data the right way? And so the good news is that the variability is less in the security world than it is in the user experience world, for example. However, there are still security criteria that you're going to have to meet. And we got new things like the Google Play data safety and like the safety program at Apple that you also have to adapt to during the cycle. So thank you for that question. So actually, a great question here. What's your advice to keep up with all the new operating systems, languages, and frameworks? The answer is get ready to be busy, I think. Eran, you want to take that one first?
Of course, I mentioned earlier, the rise of Flutter, PWAs, and stuff like that. We are seeing now Appium for the guys online that are doing a lot of functional testing with Appium. Appium is now just a moment away from releasing Appium 2.0. It's a full transformation of the technology. Now with iOS 16, there are updates to the XUI test, and Android 13 updates to the Espresso framework. So if you're a practitioner, you need to be on the lookout to any new updates for the framework. It doesn't mean that you need immediately to migrate your test scenarios that are working to the new framework, right? But you need to look at what benefits you can gain from this update, because Appium 2 brings a lot of things that are missing in Appium 1.x. New plugins, which allows you to do more coverage of testing and stuff like that. So first, be in the know, right? Understand what's coming. Leave your ecosystem so you can be more guided, and take the decision obviously based on your current state, maturity, release risks and cadence, and everything like that. But start with knowing what's surrounding you, and education, things that we were talking about earlier in this webinar, really gives you this information for free.
Absolutely. And when I just kind of reflect on it in the changes in our world, right? Every time there's a major OS update, we put out a blog or a news flash to our customers. Hey, there's this new API, you should consider it for security, or this new requirement or minimum build, I think, and all the rest. One of the fundamentals, we were doing pen testing for years before we started building software automation tools. And what we realized was that because of the variability of languages, frameworks, tools, SDKs, and everything else, binary analysis was a better way to go. So NowSecure security testing is not dependent on any language or any particular architecture. As long as the mobile app can run on a real device, on iOS or Android, we can test it. And so by moving to binary analysis, that makes us totally agnostic. We don't have to, like traditional SaaS tools, worry about, do I support this language or that language? Do I support the newest version of this language or that language? Any of you in the security world are used to waiting 6 to 12 months for Veracode to support a new OS version or language version. In this world, you can test anything as long as it runs. And so binary analysis is a big way we keep up with it, right, in terms of our approach. And we haven't really found very many binaries we can't run, which is pretty cool. So with that, we are at our time. I'd like to thank Eran for joining us today. Do you have a closing message for the folks before we shut down?
Hey, thank you for having me again, Brian. It's always a pleasure to be, with you on stage and work with NowSecure. If you need to check us out, Perfecto Blaze Meter, either reach out to me or go to our website. And I'll be happy to also continue the conversation after this webinar. If you have any questions that we didn't have time, feel free to reach out to either myself or I'm sure to Brian as well, and we can continue discussing also after this webinar. But thank you again for having me.
Thanks again for coming. I look forward to speaking with you, Eran, at our Connect event, and encourage all the rest of you to sign up as well. Thanks for joining us today. I'll remind you today was recorded. We will be sharing the recording, the slides, and links to a lot of the reference information you heard today within a couple of days. We encourage you to sign up for Connect. We're not going to have a DevSecOps bunch in October. Instead, we're doing Connect, and we will be back in November with our annual or our monthly webinar as well. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Bye now.